Greetings. This is Jan Spencer in Eugene, Oregon, and you are watching Conversations for a Preferred Future. This is a 10-part series, and today's conversation with Sunil Patel is the fifth in the series. And welcome, Sunil. You can tune into my website that is suburbanpermaculture.org to access the links to all the other conversations. All the conversations we're doing find their way to YouTube, and you can find those links. We've had some awesome conversations, and we're going to have a really good conversation here today too. So welcome, Sunil from Asheville, North Carolina.
Thanks.
I want to just read a little bit of your bio, just to give people a little bit of an idea of what you do, a little bit of history. So you were born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and you moved to Asheville in 2013. You are a farmer and a permaculturalist, and you studied natural farming methods and worked for farmers in California, West Virginia, New Jersey, and Oregon. And you've had experience with growing four-season biodynamic vegetables. You managed a grass-fed dairy herd. You've made artisanal raw milk cheese, and you've done baking for production in commercial wood fire oven. That's forno da legno in Italian, if you want to know. You've had some experience with natural building and permaculture sites. So a little more about Asheville. You did move to Asheville in 2013, and you have taught site management and you've taught urban farming at the Asheville Institute. We might want to know a little bit more about that. And you founded Patchwork Urban Farms in 2014. So that's a pretty good resume. And let's just start by asking you just a little bit more about your background, a little bit how you ended up in Asheville, but what your interests are, maybe briefly, what in your life moved you in the direction of food production, not only food production, but environmental sustainability, permaculture, this kind of more progressive approach. Tell us a little bit more about your background.
Well, yeah, like you said, I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and food was always like a really important part of my family life. Like my family, I think we showed a love the best through cooking and eating together. And I didn't really think I would be farming for a long time. And I actually thought I was going to become an anthropologist. So I studied anthropology in school. And when I graduated with a bachelor's degree, I decided to go live in Japan because I thought I would, go get my PhD in anthropology eventually. And Japan was really interesting for me. And so I went and lived in Japan, and I was in a village there. And that really piqued my interest in growing food, because like food was so important. And then I realized like, oh, there's this like whole missing piece of that story. And so, I like helped friends and things like that in gardens, and then, rice harvest and things like that. And then when I came back, I was like really, and in that process, I started to learn about like the plight, so to speak, of food and farming in the world as well. And so I was like really excited about like, taking my anthropology in the way of like food and culture type of study. And so when I came back to the States, I decided to apprentice on a farm so I could have like a little bit of background before I went back to school to keep studying anthropology. And then after that season, I was like, wait, I don't know. Like I didn't get that basic thing that I was looking for. I was like, I still like am clueless, after a whole season working on a farm out in California. And so I was like, I need to do another season somewhere. So I found another farm on the East Coast to apprentice on. And then by the end of that season, my like horizons opened up, and I was really kind of, like, I want to learn this and that and that. And so like, I worked on a dairy farm and learned more permaculture and natural building type stuff. And over 4 years, that happened after I came back. And then I ended up, being like, okay, farming is my path, I think. And so I just kept apprenticing, and then I managed a farm in central Pennsylvania for 4 years. And that led me to Asheville. And so that's kind of like the missing kind of piece for me was like that whole growing part of it, which I learned, the amount of skill and effort that goes into it was pretty mind blowing, and like kind of like a wake up call for, a suburban raised, like clueless kind of guy. And so I made it a point to really be conscious and aware of all of that, and also to learn how to do that work.
Sure. Just really briefly, you spent a little bit of time in Oregon. Where were you in Oregon?
Oh, I was in Coquille, Oregon.
Uh-huh.
There was like a homestead. I think they're not really operating as like a kind of intentional community anymore. But yeah, there was a homestead up there. They were doing a lot of natural building projects and permaculture design projects on the
I think
land.
I may know where you're talking about, but I've never been there. But yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
mountain
So
homestead.
yeah, kind of rural Oregon, coastal,
Yeah,
near the coast as well.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, on your website, you mention a term I want you to follow up a little bit on. You refer to yourself as a food and farming thought leader. What does that mean?
Well, I think and have thought a lot about what it means to feed ourselves, what it means to grow food responsibly, and also what it means to like really try to grow food within the current like economic paradigm and all that kind of stuff. And so, like when I moved to Asheville, I actually started teaching urban farming before I'd actually done urban farming myself. I was like, I've done a lot of farming. I know how to produce, and I know how to like create yields, and I know how to kind of run a farm business. So, what's the difference? But then like, I went on a really quick path of like thinking about like, what does it mean to like feed ourselves in the place we live, practically speaking, especially, but also like what needs to be in place to make that work on, in a very real way. Like I was like seeing that like having the like kind of super diverse like home gardens and all that kind of thing that are really like kind of permaculturally oriented is probably not like what's going to feed us in a real way, because most of that stuff goes to the birds, like literally. Like the birds eat all everyone's berries, and so like you have to have production models that like actually produce yields and are like efficient and all that kind of stuff. And so like I feel like I've had a lot of insight into that, like what a city kind of regional food system kind of looks like when you're
Mhm.
talking about from the micro scale. I'm always kind of going from the micro point of view, and then I'm hoping like to meet some of the more macro regional type of initiatives that are happening with like food aggregation and distribution and all that kind of thing. So lots of like thought and leadership around that in Asheville. Like I was all up in the Food Policy Council and all up in all the kind of initiatives and nonprofits that are doing this kind of work.
So there is in Asheville, I know Asheville is certainly one of the progressive cities of North Carolina. And so you have a food policy council. So is what you're doing really strange there? Or I know we're going to talk a little in a short time about the Patchwork Alliance, and I'm amazed at how many participating producers there are there. But can you give us a little bit of a sense of, does the city council know about these kind of activities? Does the city have any kind of a climate plan or some type of encouragement of local food production?
Mhm. Yeah, so Asheville, like, on the surface, it's like doing amazing things, but then sometimes you're like, oh wow, like I can't believe this isn't already happening, or I can't believe there isn't like a Asheville food hub already, and all those kinds of things come to mind. But at the same time, it's like amazing how much is going on here. What I'm doing with the multi-plat farm isn't like, there's other people doing similar things, with growing on larger tracts of land for the city setting, but there's also, I guess I'm like one of the, maybe I'm the only like market farmer who's doing it in the city, maybe, trying to make it work as a business for my livelihood kind of thing. And yeah, but the farming culture is big. Like there's like a lot of farmers markets, and there's a lot of growers, not in the city necessarily, but all around the city. There's
Mhm.
quite a bit of amazing products, like from farm products to like value added, like products like that.
Yeah, yeah, we'll get into that a little bit later because I've seen the website of Patchwork Alliance, and I was just pretty impressed with the variety of products and services. So let's do a little bit of a screen share here. What we want to look at now is this picture that you recently put together. These are the locations, I'm assuming, within town that you do farming on. Tell us about this picture and give us more of an idea about how you manage Patchwork Farms.
So I like the cluster of pins in the middle there. I live like right in the middle of those three pins there, Dysart, Cloyes, and Falconhurst. Um, and so I'm here right now, and that's where you can place me. And then those three spots are like three different pieces of land that have gardens on them. One of them I have a flock of chickens on, the Falconhurst one, um, and a big garden. Um, and yeah, my flock is around 30 birds or so right now. It's a pretty, like, West Asheville is full of these adjacent property borders in the backyards. So like you have two streets that are going parallel, and then all the houses have these big backyards that are all kind of contiguous. And
Oh
so,
my gosh, that's very interesting. Sure.
yeah, and so this one in particular is actually one property, but a lot of times it's subdivided already. This is one of the few that was like a farm into the 90s, I believe. It was one of the oldest farms like still existing in Asheville city limits
So what's the
at the time.
size of these places in terms of acreage?
So the one I was just talking about is about an acre, and these other ones are like really small. Like the gardens I have on them are about 50 by like around 50 by 50, you could say, feet. Um, Two small gardens there, and then the big garden I have is about 100 by 50 or so. Um, and so all my gardens range around like 1,500 square feet to uh, like 10,000 square feet or so.
And what would you
10,000.
estimate the aggregate when you add all these plots together? What
Oh,
would
yeah, I've
be,
been I've been meaning to
what do you have
recalculate
there?
for a while. Like, the story behind this setup is like I used to be mostly in North Asheville. This is all in West Asheville. And so since I've like kind of shifted over here, I actually haven't recalculated, but I think it's close to about a half acre of like actual garden space over all the 7 patches that I have going.
And from what kind of arrangements do you have with the people who own the properties?
So, so yeah, that story is like in the first year in 2014, I just kind of posted on Facebook. I made a Facebook page. I made the name of the farm, and I kind of just put the word out. And basically, what I do is I have a template for a MOU, which means Memorandum of Understanding. It's kind of like a contract agreement, but it's not like so officialized or legalized. And so it just like documents the agreement that I'm making with the landowners. And what I do is like a rental trade agreement. And so I farm people's land in exchange for credits to my produce. So they get not only what I'm growing on their land, but like, all of what I'm growing, access to it. And so they get credits to my produce overall that they can spend through the year. And it's, like I just modeled the pricing off of like the county rental rates, which is like less than 2 cents per square foot or so. But so I do a 2 cents per square foot kind of exchange baseline kind of agreement with my landowners. And then a lot of them fall below like $50 for the whole year. And so like I do like a $50 minimum as a trade. And that sounds really low, but it's also, I'm doing all the management, and then I'm, basically renting it. And so like the costs of, farming, kind of warrant having such a low rental rate. But most landowners are just in it for something happening rather than the lawn that they have to mow, and that kind of thing.
So you advertised, and you had people who said, okay, I'm good with that. Did you actually have to break ground on some of these properties that were just like grass or something, and you had to turn a grassy yard into? Yeah, I'm sure
Yep.
you had some criteria. Looking at this picture here, I know Asheville is kind of there in the Appalachian Mountains, and there's a lot of up and down. Like this house down here, there's got to be quite a slope going down here.
Yeah.
But you have, of course, want mostly flat type of property. Did you have to turn anybody down with their properties that they offered?
Oh yeah. Yeah. My list actually grew to like 130 landowners or so. And, I was only farming like, I think at the peak there was like 16. I had other growers involved too. And we had like together maybe like 16 or so, maybe even 18 patches. Um, and, uh, and yeah, like, yeah, I've had to like, prioritize certain pieces over others based on location, based on size, based on like farmability, all that kind of stuff. And then also like have had to drop pieces and add pieces over the years and that kind of thing too. Um, that one that was in the picture right now, I'm not farming anymore. Unfortunately, I like that one a lot,
Hmm.
but location wise, it just didn't make sense to keep it going at that moment. Although now I could probably take it back on because I'm closer by now.
So for these locations that you have your farms, you would have a sign out front, something like this, that says this is a patchwork urban farm.
Hmm. Yeah, and I named the patches off the street that they're on usually, and so
Mhm.
that's like a street in North Asheville that I used to farm. Hmm.
Yeah. Oh no, that's really good. Let's take a look at a couple more of these locations. Whether these are still being actively gardened. I mean, you have some helpers here. Um, so you manage these properties, but you have other people who co-farm these properties as well.
No. Well, for the most part, it's like the agreements I make for me, although like, it's always open-ended. is that I'm like the sole manager, and so I'll provide, you know, my labor and all that stuff. I kind of get a little bit, it becomes a little bit more work to like kind of share in like the entire, like too many cooks in the kitchen kind of feeling sometimes with such a small little
Sure.
creation. But some landowners, you know, like I'll make, you know, special efforts to like grow things that, you know, they might want to see growing and, you know, things like that. But for the most part, it's like I'm like managing all my patches as one farm. And so it kind of leaves out like having individualized kind of patch kind of dynamics that are happening because all of them relate to each other in their crop rotations and in the time of year that they're planted and all that kind of stuff to kind of make the entire operation, you know, work.
Sure. Did you ever have any interns working with
Oh
you?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. This picture, I'm trying to remember. I think that's Kate in the background. So I've had like I've had a farmhand who turned into a intern, and so what I did was I gave them a few patches, and I kind of led them through the entire season, and I kind of incubated them in a way where I gave them like I paid for the startup. I mean, for the material costs of that growing operation, but they were like kind of like doing it what it takes to grow and, you know, bring the harvest in and all that kind of thing. And so then eventually they were able to like inherit those patches, and, you know, they're now like kind of supporting other gardens and gardeners in town and kind of passing that forward. That's like kind of part of the vision in the beginning, was that what I was hoping was like, you know, I'd set up a bunch of patches, and then, you know, I might bring on someone who is like maybe exchanging labor in the form of, you know, like skills and knowledge, um, labor for skills and knowledge. And then eventually they could inherit a patch that's already, you know, ready to go, and they can kind of kickstart their growing enterprise, and then they would do the same. And so like then I was like kind of hoping that would kind of form a kind of momentum in like lots of land being like regeneratively um, managed, um, and you know, kind of like exponentially growing that process through many growers. Unfortunately, we haven't had a lot of growers come on board just because, one, we haven't campaigned a lot for it, and two, it's like it's actually kind of rare to find folks that are like have enough time to put into land that will like support their livelihoods, like the risks involved with all of that and starting a business and all of that kind of thing. And especially if, you know, you haven't had experience market farming in some form, it can be kind of scary and not a big
Yeah, it's one thing to grow the food, but maybe something else to actually have the coordination and the skill to manage the keeping track of it and getting it to the market and looking after all that. Because just as you know, that just growing the food is only part of it. So are there any other people, have you graduated from Sunil's School of Suburban Farming? Are there any other people actively doing this now?
Well, yeah, that person, Kate, who I was talking about, who I mentored,
Sure.
she's still doing, she's still got a patch that she inherited, and supporting another garden in the South Side community here. They have a community garden that she's been highly involved with over the last few years, supporting their kind of systems and management, and actually doing a lot of the work there too. Um, and we were actually tied together for a long time, as you know, like her project was kind of part of Patchwork Urban Farms, but last year we kind of like decided to trim it all down, and I started cooking a lot more too. So I've been doing cooking where I do pop-up dinners and catering and that kind of thing. And so we're connected, but we're different operations officially. Yeah, and there's other growers in town who I connect with who have like urban setting type, like there's someone who does lots of homesteady type permaculture stuff at their place, and we've been connected with Patchwork in the past as well. But yeah, over the last few years, it's just made more sense to kind of hone it down to me, and it's plenty to kind of keep going with.
So you mentioned catering. Of course, one of permaculture principles is having a stability and a structure, and having multiple kinds of overlapping enterprise, if you were perhaps in an economic structure, and not being so completely dependent on any one single revenue stream. So you do some gardening, farming, but you do some catering as well, because you're into cooking. So you kind of have several different kinds of ways to earn a living. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, yeah, like growing produce in general is a hard business to make work, unless you're selling to like super high-end markets and restaurants and that kind of thing. And over the years, like I've tapped into those markets a bit, but like my passion is like about, feeding the people kind of thing. And so it kind of hurts a little bit to like, be catering to such a high-end market sometimes. And then also like management wise, like having the patches and me not living there, and, trying to create that super dainty, like high, like super tender, super dainty, high-end produce was a little tough. And then in a lot of cases, I'm spending money on city water, and then at a certain point, I'm just not going to keep watering just because it'll be too expensive to. And so, it's hard to cater to that market in that way as well. And so I was doing CSA mostly from the beginning, and then a little bit of farmers market dotted in there, and now mostly trying to push everything through the Patchwork Alliance cooperative online market, and then hopefully we'll have some physical versions of that multi-producer market in the future as well. I'm not sure, is that what you asked about? I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's good. You certainly farming and food production to make a living out of that. I've heard some similar comments before, from other people who around here in Eugene, there's lots of CSAs. I don't know, there's dozens. There may be 50 CSAs around Eugene.
Yeah.
And I know some have been producing, and these are multi-acre, these are farms, but some of them are almost household names around here. And then, of course, I probably wouldn't recognize the names of most of them just because, but there's not so much of that going on in Eugene. There's nobody doing exactly what you're doing there. We certainly thought about that. My own particular property, I have a 1/4 acre suburban property, and it's a permaculture makeover project. I have edible landscaping everywhere. There's no grass. It's all turned into, and it gives me a little bit of a sense of how much food you might grow on a modest sized property. And I am nowhere near optimizing, because I'm not a pro at growing food myself, but we have a pretty good climate here for doing food production. And I know a lot of people, our neighborhood, we'd like to think of as the garden district, the river and garden district, because the Willamette River is the east side of the neighborhood. And this neighborhood has a lot of agricultural history. Of course, before the white people showed up, it was probably paradise, for the indigenous people. But I don't know anybody who's doing exactly like what you're doing. But the experience of those of us who have gardens is that there could be an enormous amount of food grown right here in town. We're not going to be doing wheat and pinto beans and these kind of like field crops, but it's just such a sensible thing to do. And of course, now what we're seeing in the Mideast and the Suez Canal, there's one big ship that's clogged up, global trade, and this is costing billions of dollars.
Yeah.
And COVID and climate change. How many more messages do we need that we need to not live like our grandparents did, but live a little bit more sensibly? And that's why your model is so important, because it may be kind of a fringe item right now, but personally, I just have to think that there's going to be more people who are going to say, why weren't we doing like what Sunil's doing? Let's get moving with local food production.
Yeah, I see like a lot of potential for like sustenance farming in the city as well, where it's like not necessarily like people like trying to make a living growing food and selling it, but like neighbors getting together and growing like enough potatoes for themselves for the year kind of thing, you know. And I've been like really pushing that idea a lot with like some of the communities we work with, like, I'm constantly connected with like food desert communities and that kind of thing, just to like, try to collaborate and try to create relationships from the beginning of my farm, which is a big undertaking, and also requires a lot of time developing friendships and relationships. But I've been really hoping that by being involved, I can start to like show people like how easy it is to grow 500 pounds of potatoes on like a really small amount of land, when you're talking about some of the yards you're seeing in Asheville. And that kind of thing is really exciting to me. And then I also really like, when I was thinking about like, when you asked about the thought leader thing, like one of the notions is like that, the city, like the urban setting should all be like zone 0 and 1 when you're talking about permaculture zones. And so in that regard, like that would mean that, like we as producers in the city and the region really need to start to like coordinate in that way in order to like actually make like a regional food system that would work, because technically zone 1 should stay in zone 1. I mean, of course, like people out in the country would have a zone 1 around where they live, but in the city, like that's all we should be doing, and we should be doing it to the max. And then like out from there, you're like your producers that are more outside of town would start to be doing zone 2, 3, and so on. And so like I'm hoping through like the Patchwork Alliance, like bringing producers together in that way, just like with a cooperative, sharing marketing and distribution. But like my real like kind of underlying excitement is that like we'll be able to like start to cooperatively crop plan in order to like not create surpluses, and also like place what we're growing correctly, so to speak, when you're talking about permaculture zones and that kind of thing. So yeah, that's kind of, I'm really excited about being able to do that kind of thing.
Do you have in Asheville, are there school gardens? Does the city have any kind of a community garden program? Oftentimes faith communities have acreage. I know in my neighborhood, there are a couple of nice gardens on church property. Do you have, who are the allies? Who could be neighborhood associations? Does Asheville have a neighborhood program of neighborhood associations that might meet once a month and just address different issues? Like I was explaining earlier, before we started recording, that here in River Road, we have a neighborhood organization that has different committees, and local food is a pretty important item right here. What are some of the allies and the assets that maybe you have worked with, or maybe over time when things become a little bit more urgent might say, we need to turn this acre at the church into a garden, or maybe some of those things already happening. Schools oftentimes have lots of property, not to turn the playground into a garden, but that's a whole other kind of form of education, with school gardening and teaching kids, about where their food comes from.
Yeah. There's so much, like, I feel like a lot of the reason that this farm still exists is because of all the people and organizations in town who've supported in different ways. So like, I've been tied to a nonprofit called Bountiful Cities since the beginning, and they actually helped me secure a grant a few years ago through the city, and so it was a city-funded grant, and that kind of thing that we got quite a huge boost from, and then
Hold that for a second. You had a city grant that you filled out an application, and the city provided you with some money. Tell us a little bit more about the grant. How did that work? What was the city program, and what kind of information did the city want? What was your responsibility for gaining that grant?
So I have to remember what it was called, but it was some kind of like community development type of grant, from the city, and the nonprofit Bountiful Cities was actually the applicant, but they were incubating my farm, and they were incubating another business, a mobile grocery, and so they decided to apply to fund us, with capital to expand our businesses, basically. And so the city was awarding money based on like community benefit type of things, and so we were able to like have like a community reach, like benchmarks that we were already reaching or we're going to reach and would be able to reach through the grant and that kind of thing. And so that was, yeah, really amazing, to be, boosted in that way. I was able to, like set up a lot more infrastructure on the farm, got a mobile cooler, and like got a whole bunch of tunnels and things like that.
That was some
Yeah.
numbers of thousands of dollars that grant was.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder how many other people know. I would be certain that almost any city, most people who aren't really tuned into what the city does a whole lot more than pick up the trash, and fix the streets. A lot of cities have different programs, and what you found out about would probably be of interest to other people in Asheville who don't have a clue that the city has some of these opportunities. I know it's that way here in Eugene. The city does a lot of cool stuff, but most people don't know anything about it.
Yeah, and a good angle is to like get in touch with a nonprofit that exists already, that you could maybe like access grant funding through, because a lot of times if you're a private entity or a business, then it's hard to get some of the grant type of funding that's out there. But it's great to develop a relationship with an already existing nonprofit, and have them act as a fiscal agent, and also they'll know where all those funds are and stuff like that. So yeah, and there's a lot of other nonprofits in town, Organic Grower School and other like food access kind of organizations that we've been connected with, channeling some of our food through them, and and then there was another aspect I was going to talk about. But yeah, like lots of support. I guess that's what I was trying to get to, is like there's been lots of support now, from landowners as well, in super small ways or like, more significant ways, just supporting all of it to happen. Oh yeah, so this is a case in point. That's like a salon in West Asheville, and they had this little pad, and we got in touch. We're like, hey, could we put like a little farm stand up, like a roadside stand up at your place? And they're like, yeah, sure. And so, we did a CSA distribution. Actually, I think that was just a retail farm stand that we set up in West Asheville. So yeah, in the early days, I was doing roadside stands a lot, thinking that it could be a viable thing, but it ended up being not quite worth the effort, because you just don't get enough foot traffic and that kind of thing. So you need a lot of people going by in order to sell enough to.
Was this on a fairly busy street? Was it a really good location?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty visible there, but parking would have been a little bit like of an effort for someone who wanted to just kind of stop randomly after they saw it. So it's definitely something to be careful about, like just putting up a stand in the middle of town may be awesome, but it also may not be so good.
I can I can relate to that. I've had a few ideas I thought, wow, this can't miss.
Yeah.
And they did. That's
Yeah.
funny. Yeah, let's take a look at this picture here too. This is a pretty nice photo. I like this one. You're doing a little show and tell here.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that was Organic Growers School is a nonprofit in town that does lots of food and farming education type stuff, and
Ah,
they have a farmer apprentice kind of list serve, and they do like tours to other farms like every month or something. And this was like one of the first seasons I was growing, and they did a tour out to my farm.
yeah, yeah, that's a nice crowd of people right there too.
Mhm.
Yeah, so good. And then there's this picture here that I want to show. Looks like some kind of an event right here.
Yeah, that's a pop-up dinner. I think I did, or it might have been a celebration. I did like lots of dinners where I sold tickets and people came to eat. But this one looks like it might have been a celebratory dinner of some sort. Almost every year of the farm, I've done some sort of outdoor like appreciation dinner for either my like CSA members or for the neighborhood. There's a neighborhood that actually the one I'm living in now who we connected, significantly over the land, and we were kind of partnering around, how it kind of developed. And so we would do like a collaborative dinner for like the neighborhood and things like that.
Sure, yeah,
Yeah.
that's good. So we wanted to spend a little time on the Patchwork Alliance. So let's just show this picture here. This is from your website. Tell us
Mhm.
about the Patchwork Alliance.
Yeah, so like this was like originally Patchwork Urban Farms, the vision was that it's a cooperative of growers farming in the city, sharing marketing, distribution, and infrastructure. So sharing coolers, sharing greenhouses, things like that. Um, and then eventually it became more like, oh, we don't have enough growers in the city, but we want to have this kind of shared online marketplace. So we just started opening it up to any producer in town, which was always like the grand vision, which I thought would kind of come after, to try to like really affect like a citywide food system by connecting a bunch of producers together. Um, and so basically, it's a cooperative of producers, consumers, and workers. So everyone involved owns the business. You can also shop without being an owner as well. But as a shopper, it's just like a food co-op, where you pay $10, however so often, and then you get some special perks and a profit share if that comes down the line. Um, and so we have producer owners who are vending through our online market. It's a great software platform that allows for producers to have their own identity and set their own prices and control their own inventory. And then it has a really streamlined process of like centralizing payment and then like being able to pay producers out for their sales, and that kind of thing. And so this is like the year that we're really trying to build ownership in the cooperative, from consumers and producers alike. And so we're working really hard, getting producers on board as well as trying to get our sales up and going. And so people put in orders once a week, and then we deliver them either to homes or to pickup locations. Um, and yeah, and the vision is like to start out with this online marketplace, but also to like do lots of other things such as cooperative crop planning, like cooperatively run storefronts, like physical storefronts and that kind of thing
Mm,
as well.
mhm.
And so lots of exciting ways, like I'd love to see if we had like 7 day a week multi-vendor storefront open, in every side of Asheville. That'd be like really awesome. um yeah, and so that's kind of Patchwork Alliance. It's kind of like the culmination of the vision behind Patchwork Urban Farms, which is why Patchwork kind of got carried over into this business. In actuality, they're two separate businesses, and Patchwork Urban Farms is just one producer in the cooperative. But I'm still, leading in a big way both projects. Hopefully not leading the cooperative so much so I can get back in the dirt. I'm finding myself doing a lot of spreadsheets and financial plans and bylaws and all this kind of stuff, which is important and kind of fun sometimes. But I'm also like, the whole reason I'm doing this is so I can like just be one grower in this huge network that's kind of supporting what I'm doing,
Yeah, well, that may happen at any time. You just don't know. That's part of the adventure. I
Yeah.
want to mention this image. This is only a small number of the entities involved with the Patchwork Alliance. I think there's, what I saw was maybe 50 or 60 logos on the website. So that's pretty impressive right there. When you were talking about some of these ideals, it reminded me of this place I know of in Portland, Oregon. It's called our 42nd Ave, our 42nd Avenue. It's an economic development entity that is funded by tax increment through the city. And it's a very small economic development corporation, but it's very tuned to the neighborhood to create jobs, to create a way to take care of more needs. I'd say if I was to think of a permaculture minded economic development corporation, this would be it. They've started a farmer's market. There's a fair amount of urban agriculture in the Cully neighborhood in Portland, where more recently was annexed into the city. So it's even got a little bit of a rural feel to it. But one of the projects, and I don't know what the status is of this project, but there was an empty large commercial building in this multi-block area. And the intention was to have maybe 8, 10, 12, 14 vendors inside this. I would imagine it's probably 8 or 10 or 12,000 square feet, and it could be kind of like a little alternative mall with entities like some of these here in Patchwork Alliance. Maybe somebody's working on that there, but that's easier said than done. But that's what our 42nd Ave does, is to work on projects that are sensitive to the community.
Nice.
And have the kind of values, that people in the neighborhood have. But I don't know what's the most recent update on that project. But I would imagine, like any town, there's empty spaces all around that could turn into something like that.
Yeah, I thought that physical aspect would kind of come a little more in the future for us, but like we've got like someone just like came along the line the other day with like an amazing space that could potentially turn into exactly what I was talking about even this year. So it's like, oh wow, really exciting.
So is that something that's let's see what happens, or what's the status of that idea?
Well, we just met like last week, and I'm going to be throwing around some ideas with him. I saw the space, and it's like full, like it needs a lot of work, but it's like fully capable of being like all of that and more, as far as like a multi-vendor storefront, also like a lot of outdoor space for growing and doing pop-up markets, outdoor markets, all kinds of stuff can happen there. Even like the remnants of a kitchen, like a commercial kitchen, could be rebuilt and that kind of thing too. So like shared kitchen space. And so like all those ways that producers can share, like not just with marketing, but also like with producing, shared kitchen space, shared storage space, all that kind of stuff is stuff that I'd really love to see happening in these physical opportunities. And then another aspect that I wanted to mention was like by coming together, like we can really kind of start to create alternate ways of exchanging and alternate ways of having our economy work. And, you know, if we're all owners of this one business as consumers, producers, and workers, then I feel like that's going to empower us a lot in order to like create new modes and new patterns of how we do these things. Right now we're like fully entrenched in like the regular paradigm. Even now, like I was like, oh, cooperative, cool, but then you're like, it's like a huge wake up call, because like at every turn, you know, you're relegated to like conforming to this kind of, you know, state run type of very difficult system to actually, you know, do what you need to do to, you know, make good food available to as many people as possible, you know, and all that kind of thing. It's like the barriers are like so apparent when you try to create a project like this. And so I'm hoping in the future, but once we have enough participation, we can really like create internal initiatives to really like kind of empower ourselves to like, you know, try to overcome some of those barriers that are put in front of us.
Yeah, well, there's never any discussion about what types of economic system would the country really like. It's just assumed that it's capitalism as we know it. And all through history, there have been different types of economic systems, and many of those we wouldn't want either. But to me, it seems like that humans would do well to learn the lessons of their period of history and everything that's happened before, and improve upon what happened up to that time.
Mm-hmm.
And personally, I think capitalism has kind of run its course, and there needs to be a new set of values and a new set of goals to, I think, to live within the boundaries of the natural world, but also at the same time to bring out the best and positive human potential. And I don't see capitalism doing that as well as maybe some other choices. So, you know, what we're talking about here are ideas. I know there are people all over the country and all over the world with these kind of ideas. And maybe the time is coming where the things come into place and we start actually creating the kind of a society and economic system that people deserve, you know, that the planet deserves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the problem really to me lies not necessarily in capitalism, but in like a state capitalism, more so, because I mean, essentially, I don't know, we could get in a long philosophical discussion, but
It's okay.
essentially,
It's okay.
essentially, like, you know, capitalism on its own is like meant to be an organic process, but when you have a state government involved with regulating it, that's when you run into problems. And of course, transitioning to something that's not regulated would be really problematic. I understand that, but
We've seen a little bit of that in the last. I'm a baby boomer, you know,
yeah,
and the trickle down economics doesn't seem like a good idea either.
yeah, no, I mean, like it's because, you know, like if it's state run, then there's ways to game the system, and so of course corporations are going to game the system, and because that's the intent, is to make money, and so like whatever means necessary, because that's kind of what the thing is. But if you don't have like a government to game, the system to game, and it's just an organic process, that's kind of what I'm shooting for, you know, like where we can have real relationships within our own economy and decide how we want to exchange, you know, without intervention from some outside force. And we
That would,
can work out, you know, who we buy from and not buy from, and allow that power to take, you know, because like it, you know, everyone's like, oh, you shouldn't buy from, you know, so and so, but we're relegated, really, you know, like when it comes down to it, even if you're like a really like ethical buyer, you're relegated to like, you can't buy something from someone you support morally, if, you know, like you actually need it and, you know, need to get it. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, it's
well, you know,
it's
we're
about
already
sovereignty to me, basically.
already seeing little
Yeah.
fragments of some of that. You know, some people will want to buy organic. Organic used to be, you know, a fringe at one time, or fair trade this or fair trade that. Some people will pay more for a higher quality and perhaps a product that doesn't have as much environmental or social baggage as well. But the current paradigm is just buy and for whatever the cheapest price you can and externalize the cost. And this is what we have is a planet in big trouble, and also a society that could be a lot more potential good than what we're seeing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So kind of let's sort of start to sort of sum up our conversation. This has been really good. If somebody came to you and asked, well, Sunil, this is pretty great. You're doing this farming suburbia and with these ideas, what kind of advice would you give somebody who seemed to have an honest interest and some intelligence on uh, helping to move some of these good ideas forward?
Let's see. I think it's about yeah, really being like kind of smart about like how you're going to make something you do viable, because that's like the biggest challenge, because there's like so many barriers like we were talking about to like actually make something like this work. You know, like learning from other models, all that kind of stuff is like, you know, really great things to do. And then yeah, I mean, like really, you know, some fundamental kind of advice is just to like really be grounded in what you have in front of you and can, you know, like know for sure. I don't know, that's kind of amorphous, but I feel like it's really important to like really understand and observe, you know, all of what's around you in order to find like opportunities and also work with what you have around you well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot to work with, like we touched on earlier. A term I like is allies and assets in the community. What are the entities? Many of them already have, like faith communities, neighborhood associations, schools, already have a set of values that we share. You know, there's a lot of overlap already existing, and some of those entities may need to somehow be gently reminded about that. You know, like the ideals of the world's great spiritual traditions: care for the natural world, service to the community, uplift of the spirit, modesty of lifestyle. Those are ancient ideals and values, and they couldn't be more useful than they are right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, this has been good. We've done some nice tangents. We've kind of gone this way and that way, all within the overall idea of how can we move forward, not just in Eugene and Asheville, but as you know, there are people all over the country and all over the world with these kinds of ideas too. And there's just so much to be gained by uplifting how we take care of our needs and how we define our needs also. And it's great to hear what your contribution is in that, because you don't know how many people you've affected who you're never going to know, but maybe at some point down the line that says, yeah, there was this guy in Asheville, I kind of want to do that here. So we don't know what kind of a positive impact good actions can have on the greater good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And thank you for putting on the series and getting the word spread.
Yeah, yeah. Like mentioned earlier, this conversation and the others in the conversations for a preferred future will all be on YouTube, so you can listen to those anytime you like. So Sunil, thank you so much for joining us today. You've done a lot of good there, and you're a smart guy, and I wish you well, and your other friends there in Asheville too. If you're ever out this way, you know, give me a shout.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks so much.
Okay, Joshua, you can turn off the